Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. Japan has therefore undertaken a surprise offensive extending throughout the Pacific area. The facts of yesterday and today speak for themselves. With confidence in our armed forces, with the unbounding determination of our people, we will gain the inevitable triumph, so help us God.
Admiral Yamamoto, the mastermind behind the devastating Pearl Harbor attack, warned the Japanese War Cabinet, "We have woken a sleeping giant." Yamamoto knew that no nation on earth could match the industrial might of the United States. The knockout blow against the US fleet was designed to give the Japanese time to inflict a series of crushing defeats on the US Navy in the Pacific to force them to negotiate a rapid peace on Japanese terms. As the naval base raced to put itself on a war footing, on the deck of the submarine USS Grayling, Admiral Chester Nimitz, an ex-submariner himself, hoisted his flag as the new commander-in-chief of the US Pacific Fleet. He had a huge mountain to climb. Meanwhile, following the attack, the hatred of the Japanese was intense. All ethnic Japanese, 37% of the pre-war island population, had without exception been evicted from their homes and interned. For the US Navy codebreakers on the island, it robbed them of their vital Japanese speakers. Pearl Harbor became an island under siege. Nimitz knew that he didn't stand a chance against the Japanese fleet unless some of the battleships were repaired, however badly damaged they'd been. But effectively, he had just 3 fleet aircraft carriers, which had not been at Pearl Harbor. They now stood between Japan and complete victory. From Hawaii, long-range Catalina reconnaissance aircraft flew to the limit of their range, searching for any signs of a Japanese force. The question was, where would the next attack fall? Nimitz was desperate for some clue, and it could only come from one source, his codebreakers. Following the Pearl Harbor attack, the series of conquests promised by Admiral Yamamoto had created a vast Japanese Greater East Asia Empire, which covered a huge area of the Pacific. 10% of the Earth's surface now lay under Japanese rule. From 160 degrees west, southwards to the Pacific Islands, then westwards through the Coral Sea to menace Australia, and on to New Guinea, Java, Sumatra, northwest to Burma, Malaya, Singapore, and the Indian Ocean. The codebreakers worked round the clock to penetrate the Japanese battle plans. These were encrypted in a tough, high-level code called by the Americans JN-25. Initially, all the codebreakers could do was to use the intercepted radio signals to position enemy transmitters, both ashore and afloat. But although they had no idea what the messages contained, the sheer volume of traffic suggested the build-up to another attack. The messages were intercepted by secret US listening stations and then sent via secure undersea cables to the codebreakers, working in a bunker in Pearl Harbor, struggling to decode the JN-25 signals.
JN-25 was the Japanese Navy's main operational code, whereas the purple machine was a diplomatic cipher used by the Foreign Office and the diplomats. Purple was difficult to solve, but once solved was easier to go along with. On the other hand, JN-25 was a more difficult code to solve, not because of anything inherent in it, but because we had fewer intercepts, therefore less to work on.
JN-25 was a numerical code. It consisted of over 45,000 five-figure code groups, which stood for key Japanese words and phrases. To these basic five-figure numbers, they added random numbers, taken from a top-secret codebook. 2 numbers were added together by non-carrying arithmetic. Finally, the message was transmitted as a string of apparently meaningless numbers. In Pearl Harbor, Commander Joe Rochefort was ordered by Admiral Nimitz to attack the JN-25 code as a matter of supreme urgency. Without exaggeration, America's fate depended on it. His chief codebreaker was Tom Dyer. Everybody was drafted in to help, even the bandsman from the sunken battleship California. It was Dyer's genius to use the then brand new IBM tabulating machines to help number crunch. The task was to try to match numbers in the intercepted messages to actual Japanese words. A mammoth task in that pre-computer age. On top of that, he had to train men on crash courses to learn Japanese, the most difficult written language in the world.
It's a completely different concept of pictographs, basically pictures representing words and ideas. And it's difficult. In order to read a Japanese paper, for example, one should know at least 2,000 and preferably 3,000 characters. Once the concept is achieved, then there's the business, the mechanical memorization of these characters. They can be everything from a simple one-stroke character, the word one is just one stroke, up to characters that have as many as 30 strokes within one character. Very, very complex.
A major problem was the use in Japanese of what are called homophones, words which sound the same, but which have entirely different meanings.
A good example is the word that is now a name of a popular watch, a Japanese-made watch, Seiko, S-E-I-K-O. It's made up of 2 characters, and offhand I can think of 4 or 5 different meanings, totally different meanings. In addition to the watch name, there is a word Seiko, which means success. There's a word starlight, steel manufacturer, sexual intercourse is one meaning of Seiko, a perfume is another one, and a resort to a dictionary would yield another 10 or 12 more, totally different characters.
By early April 1942, the interception of JN-25 signals became a flood. Something was clearly up. At last, after months of round-the-clock effort, they began to read scattered bits of the most secret Japanese signals. By the end of April, the codebreakers at Pearl Harbor were able to reveal to Admiral Nimitz details of a major Japanese attack codenamed MO. It was the invasion of Port Moresby in New Guinea, as a springboard from which to invade Australia itself. Operation MO was, like all Japanese operations, complex. On the 30th of April, the Japanese striking force, with 2 fleet carriers, Zukaku and Shukaku, 2 heavy cruisers, and a number of destroyers, sailed to cover the huge Port Moresby invasion fleet. The Japanese had no idea where any American warships might be. Admiral Nimitz, on the other hand, had from his codebreakers almost the entire Japanese plan for Operation MO. He dared not risk the loss of any more ships, but he had to defend Australia. Eventually, he sent 2 vital aircraft carriers, the Lexington and the Yorktown, screened by 2 cruisers and 7 destroyers. By dawn on the 5th of May, both the US and the Japanese fleets were in the Coral Sea, but neither side knew the location of the other. At first light, the Americans launched search aircraft to try to locate the Japanese ships, as a result of which they found and sank the light carrier Shoho, separated from the main Japanese fleet, the first Japanese loss of the Pacific War. Welcome though that news was, when the pilots returned, the whereabouts of the powerful enemy battle force was still unknown. They could loom over the horizon at any moment. If that happened during a vital refueling operation, it would mean a disaster. And now the Japanese were fully warned that a major American carrier force was loose in the Coral Sea. By the night of the 7th, Although the two massive fleets still didn't know the precise location of the other, they were in fact only some 40 miles apart, just a few minutes flying time by attack aircraft. The 8th of May dawned bright and calm. Within hours, search aircraft from both sides located their enemy. The Battle of the Coral Sea commenced. It was the first naval battle in history to be fought entirely by aircraft. 82 US bombers and covering fighters took off from the Lexington and the Yorktown to attack the Japanese ships. But their attack was only a partial success. The two Japanese fleet carriers were fast and well armed. One was bombed but not hit. The second was hit by two bombs which damaged the flight deck and started a fire. But for the American ships, there was disaster. The Yorktown was hit by a single 500-pound bomb which started a fire below decks. And the USS Lexington, Lady Lex, the first heavy carrier of the US Navy, was mortally wounded and had to be abandoned, with 216 of her crew dead and with 36 aircraft still on board. Thus ended the Battle of the Coral Sea. The Japanese invasion of Port Moresby had been stopped, but the Americans had lost the Lexington and had the Yorktown badly damaged. Admiral Nimitz now really had his back to the wall. And the American pilots had learned that their aircraft were totally outclassed by the Japanese Zero fighters. Japan was poised to win control of the entire Pacific Ocean. Admiral Yamamoto now knew that he could win the war if only he could force a major decisive battle before the Americans could get their production machine going at full speed. Admiral Nimitz had one remaining decisive weapon, the Codebreakers at Pearl Harbor. He now relied totally on their ability to break JN-25 to avoid a crushing defeat. Following the Battle of the Coral Sea, the US Navy went on to full alert. Admiral Nimitz knew that Yamamoto was poised to strike with a decisive blow, while the balance of forces was so heavily in favor of the Japanese. The US Navy, softened by long years of peace, trained to become battle-hardened before the blow fell. Nimitz now had just 3 fleet carriers, the Yorktown, the Enterprise, and the Hornet. The code-breaking unit at Pearl was codenamed HYPO. Its very existence was a closely guarded secret. It was located in the basement of a secure building inside the Navy Yard. The small team sifted through thousands of intercepted Japanese naval signals. Joe Rochefort, the team leader, slaved away night and day, searching for clues. Early in May, they began to put together signs of another major Japanese naval operation, codenamed this time MI. Where was it aimed? Edwin Layton, Rochefort's senior intelligence officer, came up with a target identification as simply 2 letters, AF. But where was AF? They had to know. Washington thought that AF was in the Aleutians, 3,000 miles away to the north. Others thought that AF must be Pearl Harbor itself, but Rochefort guessed that AF could be Midway Island. He drew up a plan to test his hunch.
Midway Island had no independent water source, and they were dependent entirely on a desalinization plant. And he suggested that if a message could be sent from Midway saying that they're short on water, send a tanker full of fresh water, that might cinch it as to the identification of Midway. So they got Admiral Nimitz's approval for it, called the commanding officer at Midway, told him to send a message in a low-level code that said they needed fresh water. And within 2 days, the Japanese had said, AF has a problem. They're short on water. And that was the proof they needed.
As a result of this brilliant trap, the garrison on Midway was placed on full alert. But Washington believed firmly that the Japanese had fooled Rochefort with the water message, and that the real target for invasion was still the Aleutians, the gateway to the US. But working literally round the clock, Rochefort began to uncover what seemed to be the whole of the complex Japanese plan for Operation MI. Nimitz stuck his neck out. He ordered the attack on the Aleutians to be treated as a diversion. he placed his 3 remaining carriers to counter the Japanese Midway invasion fleet, solely on the evidence of his codebreakers. It was a tremendous gamble. If he was wrong, the US would lose the Pacific War. Everything now rested on a handful of American pilots who knew they had to take on the deadly Zero fighters.
I was just a young fighter pilot and had been with my squadron only a couple months, but real eager to get out there and have at the Zero. As all of us in the squadron were, we were fired up to go, and we had one of the rudest shocks in our life when we first encountered the Zero. We never expected anything like it. It was such a tremendously maneuverable airplane that it was unbelievable. Well, Zero could outmaneuver us all over the place, but the Zero could not take any punishment. If you got a good burst in Zero, why, it would blow right away. So that was our advantage over the Zero. Yet 1 for 1, it was a bad day to fight a Zero.
As the American Wildcat fighters maneuvered on the carrier decks, Washington held its breath. Was Nimitz right? The answer soon came. Search planes located 4 huge Japanese carriers heading for Midway. They were undoubtedly the main strike force. Navy gunners prepared to defend their ships. From Midway, Army Flying Fortress bombers took off to bomb the Japanese carriers, which were only 200 miles out from the island. The bombers had barely left when the first wave of Japanese planes arrived over the island. John Ford, the Hollywood director, happened to be on Midway filming for the US Army. This is film he took during the actual enemy attack. As the battle hotted up, US Marine dive bombers took off from Midway to attack the enemy. Most of the defending fighters were shot down by the more experienced Japanese pilots. The attacking aircraft controlled the skies over the island. As the Japanese attack planes returned to their carriers, a wave of American aircraft left the teak decks of the Enterprise and the Hornet and set course for the enemy ships, now 200 miles away. Among the aircraft were 15 torpedo dive bombers who called themselves the Coffin Squadron because of their obsolete aircraft. Every one was to be shot down without scoring a single hit. It was the high noon of the battle. On the decks of the Japanese carriers, the aircraft were being hastily refueled and rearmed for a follow-up attack. The 15 American torpedo bombers were blasted out of the sky. But high above the battle, the dive bombers, which had taken off from the Enterprise, led by Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey, were searching for the enemy carriers. As he was about to turn for home, he just glimpsed far below a Japanese destroyer turning at full speed. It was the moment of fate. The aircraft peeled into the attack. The first bomb struck at 10:26, the last at 10:30. In those 4 minutes, 4 Japanese fleet carriers were fatally hit and set alight. They were all to sink. The Battle of Midway, indeed the whole Pacific War, was turned. Never in the history of war has there been such a rapid change of fortune. One Japanese carrier, the Hiryu, was not attacked, and her torpedo aircraft set upon the American carriers.
We had 6 fighter planes left that were flyable. The only catch was we only had 40 gallons of gas apiece. But nonetheless, they wanted to get us off to try to oppose the incoming torpedo attack. Admiral Thatch and myself and about 4 others, that's exactly 4 others, manned these planes. And by the time we got off deck, the ship was firing across the deck, and all the ships in the fleet with us were firing, putting up quite a barrage. And I can vividly remember going off the deck, trying to crank up my wheels, charge my guns, which we had to do manually, and try to catch the torpedo planes coming in. I did catch one and possibly another. I saw her get hit. I saw the torpedoes hit her, and there was no way, of course, to land back aboard, and so ended up landing on the Enterprise, which is about 40 miles away. And very happy to get aboard with very few gallons of gasoline left.
Now the aircraft that had sunk the enemy carriers returned. Their air crews were jubilant. Admiral Nimitz praised them to the skies. But he had no doubt where the highest honors lay, with the Codebreakers. As he wrote in his dispatches, without the Codebreakers, his fleet would have been 3,000 miles from Midway when the Japanese attacked. Midway did not fall, but the price was high. The Yorktown and the destroyer Henman were sunk, 92 aircraft and their air crews were lost. The American production machine went into high gear. They would commission no less than 150 carriers and build 300,000 aircraft during the war years. The Japanese could not even replace their losses. Once again, the Codebreakers had proved themselves to be a decisive weapon of modern war.